Welcome to the Addicted Mind Plus, the podcast where recovery, mental health, and wellness take the front seat. I'm Duane Osterlind, and joining me is my co-host, Eric Osterlind, known for his insightful work on the Stuck Brain podcast. In each episode, we'll dive into actionable, small steps to help those in recovery journey further along the path to wellness. Our conversations are designed to be concise, typically around 15 minutes, though we may occasionally delve deeper when the topic demands it. Our goal, to provide you with practical advice grounded in real experiences and expert insights to empower your recovery journey. So whether you're on a break, on a walk, or just taking a moment for yourself, join us as we explore the many facets of recovery and mental health, one small step at a time. This is the Addicted Mind Plus, where your journey to wellness gets an extra boost. So let's get started. All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Addicted Mind Plus. I think we got a great episode today, Eric.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one today. I learned a lot researching it, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, me too. So we're going to talk about a very big study that was done called the ACEs study, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the reason this is really important is because often, especially if we're struggling with substance use disorders, there's a high correlation of having some of these ACEs, and we'll talk about what they are in a minute, and struggling not only with substance use disorder or an addictive disorder, but also struggling with mental health problems and physical problems. And what was so profound about this study is it put those pieces together. So should we talk about the history of it first, Eric, and then we'll talk about these ACEs and what they are?
Yeah, I would love that. So the history is kind of fascinating. In 1990s, Dr. Vincent Felitti, I believe that's how you say his name, he was a head of Kaiser Permanente Department of Preventative Medicine, and he was helping people with obesity. And these individuals would get pretty far in the program, meaning that they would be losing weight, they would be doing really well, and then all of a sudden they drop out. So he thought, there's something here. I got to figure out why these people are doing so well, and then all of a sudden they dropped out. So he started to put together research around that. And so he started thinking, why is this happening? I need to look into it.
Yeah, and so he started to investigate it. This was what I thought was really cool, is he started to investigate it, and he saw this commonality that these people that were dropping out had these, what he later called adverse childhood experiences in their life. And so he started to put that together. He said, well, this is something that's really interesting. Why is that?
Yeah.
And I think that's how the ACEs study got started.
Yeah. And another part that I found very interesting was at that time period, we all assumed adverse childhood experiences were from a population that was unemployed, unhoused, verbally abusive, beaten, that kind of thing. That was our perception of trauma. But what's interesting about this study is that he looked at the predominantly middle class, educated, and employed and found that they had these ACE experiences, which is fascinating.
It is, because we assumed that these ACEs were so much lower in this middle class population. And what was so fascinating about it too, to me, is that they had such a big study sample, 17,000 people. And so there's so much data here in this that it just really showed without a doubt that if a person has an adverse childhood experience, that it's going to impact them in their adult life.
Absolutely. Let's talk about what an ACE study is so our audience knows that. What is it?
Yeah, so an ACE, adverse childhood experience, they broke it into three main groups. And the first group was abuse. So that was emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. And they would ask questions. There was about 10 questions, I believe, on the ACEs study. And so one of the groups was this: did you experience some kind of emotional abuse, yelling, physical abuse, hitting, sexual abuse? And then that was one category. And then the other category was neglect, emotional and physical, meaning no one was around to support you, or you didn't get fed, or You just weren't acknowledged, didn't have a lot of support. And then the third category was household dysfunction. Was there mental illness present in the house? Was there domestic violence in the house, substance abuse, incarceration? And another surprising one was parental separation or divorce was another category. So they asked all these people these 10 questions that had these three categories in it. And then they took that data and then they looked at all of their health outcomes. That was the first part of this. Because they were coming in and doing a physical, they were coming into Kaiser Permanente, they were going to get their physical done. And when they did that physical, they also did this survey. And they put all that data together. And then they started to see these things correlating. The more ACEs a person had, the more health issues they had.
Yeah.
Which was really surprising at the time. And they started to put that together. And at that time, we didn't really see that. We didn't really know that. I think a lot of people had some suspicion that trauma impacted physical health, but this really confirmed it in a way that if you have these childhood experiences, you have a good chance it's going to impact you emotionally and physically in your adult life.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I found interesting about it changed our whole paradigm on how we see trauma. Because we used to see trauma as it had to be extreme to be trauma. So you had to be beaten to be classified as trauma. And we're realizing, no, it could be just a separation and divorce. It could be you just had an alcoholic parent that never actually beat you or hurt you or anything like that. That is considered trauma. So it changed our paradigm of what trauma actually is.
You're right. It really did change the paradigm of how we saw trauma. And so how does that apply to us today? I think there's a couple things we can take from it. And one of the things I see the most is when we start to look at the ACEs study and we start to look at people's lives, it helps them recognize trauma.
Yeah. It helps them get out of denial.
Yeah. For a lot of my clients, what I see is that a person has these adverse childhood experiences and they're in their history and they normalize them in a way. They become used to them. So they don't realize that these traumas are impacting them in the present moment. And being able to see that and recognizing that these experiences were traumatic, they impacted you physically and emotionally, and that continues in your adult life, that it helps a person, like you said earlier, break out of denial. It's like, no, those things weren't important. They didn't impact me. I'm fine. I'm over it.
Yeah.
And realizing, well, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe this has some impact on you today, and it's something to look at because we see the strong correlation of addiction. We see the strong correlation of physical health issues that come from having ACEs in your life. And you can start to put this addictive process in that context to be able to understand, oh, maybe something more is going on for me.
Yeah. And that's because when we have these traumatic events in our childhood, the brain is being formed at that time. So it's almost like the adverse childhood experience changes our default mode network, the way we just operate. And then that stays with us into adulthood. And so that's why it's important to know if I've had some of these ACEs, because this could be following you from your childhood into your adulthood, which is impacting you.
Yeah. And I was also going to say, for a lot of people that I work with, recognizing some of these traumas are really obvious, right? And it's easy to see them. If we're being physically hit, if we're being sexually abused, a person can say, yeah, that happened to me. And I can see it. And I can see that as traumatic. We can acknowledge it. It's pretty obvious. But some of the other traumas in the ACEs study aren't quite so obvious. Like neglect. Neglect oftentimes gets ignored as a traumatic experience. Children don't realize when they're being abandoned at that time, not on a cognitive level, but their body understands it, that they don't have support. And it is almost an invisible type of abuse. So a lot of people in their adult life don't recognize that neglect was actually really traumatic to the body, and that there's a lot of stress for a child when they're struggling with neglect, when they don't have support to walk through life and they've got to figure it out all on their own. And I was also thinking of another situation too, when we look at the category of household dysfunction. If you're dealing with a parent that is an alcoholic, and maybe they're not the alcoholic that is yelling and screaming and they're violent, they're just not there. They're just tuned out.
Yeah.
That's another form of neglect. Or you have a parent who's dealing with depression. Maybe they're not doing anything wrong per se, but they can't show up and support their child in that moment. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with love in a way. A lot of parents who struggle with mental illness, they love their children very much, but the reality is when you have that mental illness, you can't show up.
Yeah.
Right? They can't attune. It's more of an attunement issue than necessarily a direct abuse issue, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And the body holds on to this because this happens in early childhood when the brain is developing. So these neural pathways get set for your life. And so we get stuck in these neural pathways and this default mode network in adulthood. And so that's why it's important to look at this.
Yeah, to be able to see those defaults that may not function for us in the present moment.
Yeah.
If you've learned to just be on your own and take care of yourself and not count on anybody, and then you're trying to have a relationship with somebody, it's going to impact how you show up in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that can have more negative consequences. If you're used to living in chronic stress because you didn't know how your caretaker was going to show up that day, you just didn't know if they were going to be drunk or not drunk, or you didn't know if there was going to be dinner on the table or there was going to be food in the house. You're living under chronic stress. And I think now we're starting to realize that chronic stress, that chronic way of living, being in that state of hypervigilance, stays with us for a long time. And we know in some ways when we're hypervigilant, our body is throwing out a lot of cortisol and a lot of chemicals that we also know probably aren't the best for us all the time. If we're never getting to that rest and digest state, we're just staying in hypervigilance. And I think some of the stuff we see from the ACEs study is that we get stuck there. And that's where substance abuse comes in or addiction comes in. It's like, how do I manage this? Well, an addiction can help you get out of that state, but not realizing that there's actually trauma there that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. So how do we get out of the trauma now that we know that we have an ACE? We know that it's impacting us because we feel either in fight or flight as an adult all the time. So how do we get out of this fight or flight part of our body or these old ACE events that have been happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing to do is understand it. See the ACEs as we're talking about them now and be able to go, yeah, I had some of these experiences in my life, and acknowledge that those are there, that those ACEs are in your life. I think that's the first step we have to take. And sometimes we can do it by just seeing them listed out and go, oh my gosh, I experienced that, and that. I didn't realize I had these ACEs in my life. I didn't realize these things impacted me. Sometimes we discover them in therapy. Mm-hmm. We start to recognize our trauma as we're doing therapy. We start to see our trauma. That's a great place to start. Talking with someone who's trained in understanding this and noticing this can help you begin to recognize the traumatic impact that these ACEs have on you, so that then you can actually start to take some steps to be able to get better.
Yeah.
So the next step, I think, is, once you can recognize these things, you can start to do something with them. You can start working on emotion regulation techniques to relax the body, such as mindfulness. Mindfulness is a great, easy way to start working on these trauma memories, if you want to call them. Trauma memories in the body, I guess it's a way to call them. Trauma history. We were talking earlier, Eric, about Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, about how trauma gets stored in the body. And so even if you have these early ACEs in your childhood, that stays in the nervous system. And there's a lot of things we can do as we understand it, like mindfulness we were talking about earlier, or getting trauma therapy like EMDR, getting into recovery, stopping our addictive process so that we can face some of these traumas. Often these traumas are hidden in addiction because it's the way we've learned to cope with it.
And then building a big community around it.
Yeah.
That's key.
Having a lot of support.
Yeah. Getting the support that you need. I mean, there are medications that can help too. If you're doing therapy and you need a little bit of support there are medications that can help as well. I mean, one of the main things that I feel is you need a good support community. So there are groups that you can go to. There is group therapy. There are trauma groups that you can talk about your specific trauma with. And knowing that you're not alone is going to help move the needle quite a bit.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful about getting around individuals or others that are talking about their own trauma, because not only do we hear ourselves in them, it normalizes it for us. It encourages us to work on it in a healthy way. Get a good community around you of supported people.
Absolutely. So I just want to summarize the 3 main tips that we want to talk about today. The first one is recognize trauma, i.e., get out of denial. The second one is knowing what it does to the body. It's going to change your default mode network, the way you operate, if it happened early in childhood. And then the last one is, what do we do to get out of it? That's therapy, emotion regulation, using mindfulness, medications if needed, and lastly, building a great community. Those are the ways that you're going to help get out of those ACE experiences.
Yeah, some definitely starting steps there. So what we've done for this episode is we've put together a worksheet to help you look at your own life and see maybe if you have some ACEs in your life, to see where they are, to give you a starting point. I think that would be the first one to help us get out of denial. And then being able to work on that and create a plan for yourself to be able to say, I need to look at these things because they impact me in my present life. I need to be able to see them. So we hope to make that a little bit more concrete for you to be able to move forward and start dealing with some of these ACEs if you have them in your life.
Yes, this will help you heal, and this will help you with if you're suffering from substance use.
And the link will be in the show notes. So click on it there. You can get the worksheet. And don't forget, we are going to do our deeper dive on Friday. So sign up for that. You can go to theaddictedmind.com/plus. We're going to go into more detail about the ACEs study. We're going to give more concrete examples of these ACEs and answer any questions you have to the best of our ability. So check that out. Once again, theaddictedmind.com/plus. There is a button there to register and sign up, and we'll see you there on Friday.
And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. That helps us get found so we can help more people.
Definitely. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next episode.
See you in the next episode.
Thank you for tuning into The Addicted Mind Plus. We hope today's episode has brought you valuable insights and a small step to support your journey in recovery, mental health, and wellness. For more information about this episode and additional resources, please visit our website at theaddictedmind.com/plus. And if there's a topic you're eager to hear about or a question you'd like us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us at theaddictedmind.com and let us know your thoughts. Your journey is important, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Until next time, take care and keep stepping forward on your path to wellness.